the proceedings with the auspicious Vedic chants. The Vedic chanting will be led by Swami Prananathananda Ji Maharaj.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahabiriyam Karabhavahai Tejasvinabadhitamastu ma vidvishabhai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Medha Devi Jushamana Naagad Vishwachi Bhadra Sumanasya Tvaya Jushta Nudamana Duruktaan Brihad Badema Bidathe Subira Tvaya Jushta Rishir Bhavati Devi Tvaya Brahma Gata Shri Rutatvaya Tvaya Jushtas Chitram Vindate Vasusano Jushasvadravino Namedhe Medham Indro Dadatu Medham Devi Saraswati Medham me Ashvina Bhubhava Dhattang Pushkarasraja Apsara Suchaya Medha Gandharveshu Chayan Manaha Daivi Medha Saraswati Samam Medha Surabhir Jushata Gaswaha Amam Medha Surabhir Vishwarupa Hiranyavarna Jagati Jagamya Urjaswati Payasa Pinvamana Samam Medha Supratika Jushantam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
I extend a hearty welcome to one and all to this inaugural session of the seminar on exploring the realm of the mental, cognition, emotion, and volition. We have with us on the dais very distinguished guests to speak on the occasion, and I request the Secretary of this institute, revered Swami Suparnananda Ji Maharaj, to felicitate them and speak a few words of welcome.
Om Jananing Sharadang Deving Ramakrishnam Jagat Gurum Padapadmitayo Sritva Pranamami Muhurmu. This international seminar on exploring the realm of the mental, cognition, emotion and volition is going to start right now. I welcome the speakers, Swami Shuddhidananda ji of Advaita Ashram, Mayavati, Professors Jonardon, Ganeri, Dan Jahavi, Jai Garfield, Nolini Huson, Mark Siderit, David Vane, Daniel D. Hutto, Sharad Deshpandeji, Amita Chatterjee, Ramesh Chandra Pradhan, Ranjan Panda, Don Wallace, Sangeeta Menon, C.D. Sebastian, Mousumi Guho, Madhuchanda Sen, Smita Sarkar, Sky, Kosi Tharagan. And of course, Professor Nirmalya, who will be proposing vote of thanks. I welcome them all in our midst. They will be participating, they will be speaking on several days, in the coming 3 days. On the dais right now we have Professor Nirmalya Narayan Chakraborty, Swami Shuddhidananda ji, and Professor Jonardon Ganeri. I welcome them all. I welcome the speakers in the hall and also the audience. So, we are going to deliberate on mind. So, nobody has seen his mind or her mind. And still we feel that it is there. So, mind we can separate from our body only in dream. You all know that. And even mind has its own cause where it gets absorbed. That is Atman. That state we feel. We do not experience that way in the dream, in the deep sleep state. You all know that. But mind being finer than body, but of course grosser than Atman, is the only faculty in us which we can make use for our benefit and earn a lot. A lot means earn eminence. We can go down, we can go up. It all depends on how we make use of our mind, how much we have control over our mind. So it is a tremendous faculty in us. Then I will observe some of the brilliant ideas that Swamiji has given us here. What is the relative position of mind in our existence? Relative position in relation to body and intellect and of course, Atman or Chaitanya consciousness. Swamiji elucidates there is really no difference between matter, mind and spirit. They are only different phases of experiences. This very world is seen by the five senses as matter, by the very wicked as hell. Those who are wicked, they recognize it as hell. By the good as heaven and by the perfect as God. Swamiji has inquired into the details of the search of the reality by mind. The great mind or the modern European mind or our forefathers' mind wanted to find the solution of life in the external world. Both the European and Indian minds failed because we cannot know. We cannot know through mind anything. It is very likely that we cannot know anything, the reality, with mind. But we have to take the help of mind to get to that state. Just like we get the help of a boat to cross the river. To cross the river means to cross the waters which divide the two banks. But the Western people never made a move more. They remained there. They fell in the search for the solution of the great problems of life and death in the external world. There they remained stranded. Our forefathers were bolder to declare that senses here are helpless to find the solution. Jato vacho nivartante aprapya manasaso. Words are unable to reach, come back reflected together with mind. So they didn't stop there. They continued the search in the internal nature of man. They found the answer in the shining soul of man. So soul was discovered that way. There is no limit to the power of the mind, human mind, and effective mental training can develop the capacity for penetration through the darkness of ignorance into the light of knowledge. It is to mind that we owe our present dominant position in evolution. Mind is so important. We are still strangely ignorant about its vastness. Exploration of mind has barely begun, Swamiji observes. Psychological exploration will reveal innumerable surprises and will make available to our descendants all kinds of new possibilities of fuller and richer living. The whole of his yoga philosophy comes into our view here. We are not satisfied with man, the known. We want to know the real man, man, the unknown. For that, our approach has to be different. We have to take up the science of the self and not only to depend on the science of matter, and ultimately reach the basic truth of non-separation between macrocosm and microcosm, Jiva and Jagat, Jagat and Jiva. We have to take the help of pure mind, born of lokohito, doing good to others without the greed of gain. When we venture to study our mind, we see both the mystery of man and his mind are the deepest mystery of all. The path is as sharp as the edge of a razor. The only means to tread the path is mind. Mind needs intense training in moral purity, alertness and concentration. Revamping it is constantly necessary since it has a tendency to be thwarted by desires and laziness. We have two states of mind, scattered and gathered. When we gather our mind with efforts, it becomes yoga. We are going to explore the vast empire of mind and its functions, especially cognition, emotion, volition. That is, we are to know how the process by which knowledge and understanding of ideas is developed in the mind. 2, how our feeling of love, hatred, fear, anger originate and develop, how our decisions based on emotion rather than reasoning. There is emotion. And volition, how we exercise our power of choosing something in the midst of innumerable alternatives. Conflicting thoughts thus are to be harmonized, and a strict action plan has to be promulgated. In doing that, how much freedom we enjoy. In other words, do we have free will to make our choices in and through exploring the mind and intellect? How much subservient is mind to intellect? That is also a great issue. We have a mind each, and we separate it from our body in dream, as I have been telling in the beginning. We have to be mindful of every thought, every breath. Breath is our first karma on earth, and it is going to be the last karma in our life, and yet we do not give any attention to it. Our mind is seriously connected to the breath. We have to be mindful of what we speak, we do, what we treat, in what way we treat others. This is called bringing mindful outside. Mind is also inside. Both can be integrated to get the super mind. Result is that we become compassionate. We become compassionate. Ultimate result is this. We remember the famous song by Ram Prasad, the poet saint of Kali the mother, Mon re kisi kaj janona. Emon manav jamin roil pratit, abad korle phul to sona. How rich an estate lies fallow here. If this were tilled, a golden crop would spring. So this has been the translation of that song by Sri Aurobindo. How rich an estate lies fallow here. If this were tilled, a golden crop would spring. Abad korle phul to sona. So the mind is so important to us. All these issues are agitating our mind since right from our attaining adolescence. We are disturbed even from the adolescent period. Mind has started functioning. That's why we experience it, even at that tender age. Let us hope some definite directions we will receive from the discussions of the learned speakers. Once again, I extend my hearty welcome to you all, to the speakers, to the listeners, both. Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj. Swami Vivekananda, in his work on Bhakti Yoga, had stated, "It is not given to all of us to be harmonious in the building up of our characters in this life. Yet we know that that character is of the noblest type, in which all these three, knowledge and love and yoga, are harmoniously fused. Three things are necessary for a bird to fly: the two wings and the tail as a rudder for steering. Jnana, knowledge, is the one wing. Bhakti, love, is the other. And yoga is a tail that keeps up the balance." Unquote. Noting that jnana deals predominantly with cognition, bhakti with emotion, and yoga with training of our wills, that is volition, we may say that the theme of the seminar largely draws inspiration from these statements of Swamiji. Dr. Nirmalya Narayan Chakraborty, Professor of Philosophy, Rabindra Bharati University, will now formally introduce and elaborate on the theme of the seminar. The professor's areas of specialization include analytic philosophy of language, Indian philosophy of language, and epistemology. Dr. Chakraborty was a Commonwealth Fellow at the University of Glasgow, Scotland, and has been a visiting professor at the University of Naples, Italy. I now request the professor to take the podium.
स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः. Revered Swami Suparnananda ji, respected Swami Shuddhidananda ji, eminent philosopher Professor Jonardon Ganeri, distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a matter of great delight that Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, with the financial assistance of Ministry of Culture, Government of India, is organizing this international seminar on exploring the realm of the mental, cognition, emotion, and volition. Mind, whatever it is an ineliminable part of our vocabulary that we use in understanding ourselves, others, and the external world. And if language mirrors our conceptual fabric, then mind and related ideas occupy a large place in our conceptual repertoire.
We are creatures that think, experience, feel emotion, and make decisions. Understanding these aspects of human is crucial in understanding the kind of being we are. The Kenopanishad starts with the question, by whose desire mind is directed to its object. Kena ishitang patati preshtitang manaha. In a way, this is a perennial question that has tired the philosophical mind since time immemorial. But what is this mind? What is its place in a world filled with things of different kinds? Traditionally, mind is regarded as something qualitatively different from things that are physical in nature. How could one account for this dichotomy of the physical and the mental? Does it make sense to talk of a passage where the physical lends itself amenable to the mental, or vice versa? Panpsychism and eliminativism are the two options. Or one could talk about a middle path where mental events could be said to have their places without alluding to laws, physical laws, relating the mental events to the physical events. There is a venerable tradition of treating mind as consciousness. If we think of conscious states as exhausting the realm of the mental, then the ownership of these mental states comes to the forefront, as well as the identity of the owner that lives through these mental states becomes important. It is the mind that constitutes a person, what she is, what she projects herself to be. If mind is an internal sense organ through which we come to know our mental states, then, according to some, we have to assume another entity called Atman, who could be said to own the fleeting mental states. Of course, the relation between the self and the occurrent mental states is a matter of intense debate. Assuming that there is something called mind, the question regarding our knowledge of mind assumes significance. We not only claim to know our own minds, we also claim to have knowledge of other minds. We tend to believe that knowledge of one's own self is infallible, direct, and salient. Each of these claims could be questioned. The source of our knowledge of other minds is also amenable to different interpretations. The metaphor of the computer has been brought in to account for explanation of mental events. But philosophers raise the question as to whether this computational perspective captures the content of mental states in its entirety. A significant part of our mental life concerns emotions of varied kinds. Emotive response to not only turns the object into a valuable one, it also instigates the mind toward a certain kind of behavior to the object. Knowing an object and emotive bonding with an object could be said to be of distinct kinds. The former is propositional in nature, and so truth-apt, while the latter is non-propositional, and so the question of truth or falsity does not arise. One could argue that emotion does not exhaust itself in feeling, and so it has got a cognitive aspect to it. In fact, it is only because that emotion is a fusion of feeling and knowledge that emotion lends itself amenable to moral approbation or disapprobation. There are philosophers who argue that both the cognitive and the emotional experiences are not simply given, they are enacted by humans, not in abstraction, but in their being embodied and being situated in the world. This line of thinking, if drawn further, would threaten the very distinction between reason and emotion, a distinction that has a checkered history in the Western tradition. Blurring this distinction would also ignite the question whether emotion, like cognitive mental states, is intentional in nature. If emotion has a propensity to direct people to act in a certain way, then an account of emotion is closely tied up with an account of will or volition. Action is something that an agent does rather than what happens to her. And in that case, the agent has the power to prefer one course of action over another. This power to prefer one over another is called volition. But preference per se might not be enough for my corresponding willing. I might prefer to fly in the sky, but I might not will it simply because I am not in a position to do so. Also, one could think of will going against the desire. If I am threatened to persuade somebody to do something that I do not approve of, I might will to persuade the person, accompanied by my desiring that I fail in persuasion. In general, however, willing or volition is the power of the mind, exercising which the mind aims at performing an action or forbearance of it, provided both these fall within the power of the person concerned. The problem of self-knowledge has strong moral implications. Self-knowledge is intimately associated with individual freedom and responsible agency. If self-knowledge is infallible and salient, then the person could be said to have an intentional state. And also she is aware that she entertains that very mental state. If so, then could one look at the relation between the first order attitude and the corresponding second order attitude causal in nature? If it is causal in nature, then given certain blocks, the causal chain might collapse. And then there could be a fissure between the subject's self-ascription and her actual first-order attitudes. This is a great threat to the very idea of moral responsibility or moral commitment. For could such a person be held morally culpable? Moreover, in order to be able to rationally evaluate one's own different attitudes, or even to assess the coherence of the different attitudes and the ensuing actions, an individual is required to have the idea of oneself. In order to account for one's own moral evaluation, the thought and attitudes need to be indexed by a first personal account. It is only then that a person can assess, criticize, and reformulate her thoughts and attitudes. If philosophy is expected to shed light on human experience in all its facets, then many of the issues hinted at, along with other cognate questions, constitute a large part of any serious philosophical deliberation. Remembering the Delphic oracle concerning knowing oneself and the Upanishadic call with regard to self-knowledge, one feels the urge to undertake a discourse on the life of mind with its vagaries of experience. The proposed seminar, we hope, would undertake an academic journey, stopping at important turnovers along the path that philosophers have crossed. Some of the probable questions we hope that are to be addressed in next 2.5 days during the seminar are: what is the relation between the mental and physical? What is the nature of self-knowledge? What is the rationale behind reason-emotion binary? What is the significance of the triangular aspects of emotion, namely feeling, evaluation, and motivation? What is the relation between emotion and agency? What is the relation between conflicting emotions and self-knowledge? What is the relation between volition, freedom, and necessity? What is the relation between freedom in respect of willing and determination of the will? What is the relation between self-knowledge and moral responsibility? How does religion look at the relation between self-knowledge, ideal human state, and emotion? We all look forward to listening to exciting and thought-provoking deliberations for the next 2.5 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. It's an honor to have with us revered Swami Shuddhidananda Maharaj, the head of the Advaita Ashrama, a branch of the Ramakrishna Math. Revered Maharaj has many times in the past delivered lectures here and has enthralled the audience. I offer my pranam and request Revered Maharaj to address us all.
Paratmanamekam jagadbijamadyam niriham nirakaram onkara vidyam yato jayate palyate yena vishvam tamisham bhaje liyate yatra vishvam. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. My pranams to revered Swami Suparnananda Maharaj. My namaskars and regards to Professor Nirmalya Narayan Chakraborty, Professor Jonardon Ganeri, and my namaskars and regards to all the distinguished speakers who have assembled here from different parts of India and even abroad. And my regards and namaskars to all the eminent audience assembled here. At the very outset, I thank the organizers to have given me this chance to express my views on this a very important subject, the realm of the mental. What I feel is, to say that the realm of the mental is an important area is a kind of understatement. It is not one of the important subjects that human beings have to deal with. What I feel is, the realm of the mental is the subject which every human being has to negotiate with. Why? At the human plane of existence, our Shastras, they tell us that the mental realm becomes dominant. It is only at the human plane that the mental realm becomes predominant in this entire creation. In all other species, whether it is animals, the plant kingdom, or all other species, they are purely physical. Their whole life is centered in sensory system and the physical structure alone. It is when we come to the human plane of existence, just visualize this entire creation itself. It is at this plane of existence, the realm of the mental dominates everything. What is the difference between one human being and another human being? Or if I ask, how do we describe human life itself? The best answer to this question is, human life is nothing but the realm of the mental functioning in a certain direction and in a certain way. It is this realm of the mental functioning in a certain direction and in a certain way which distinguishes one human being from the other human being. Therefore, to say that exploring the realm of the mental is an important subject is actually speaking an understatement, because when it comes to the human plane of existence, the realm of the mental is the realm which every human being has to explore. And the more we have the knowledge about this realm, the more control we gain over this realm. We all know very well that knowledge of a certain phenomenon and the control over it, they go hand in hand. The more we have knowledge about the physical dimension of this world, to that extent we have got mastery over it, control over it. And the same is applicable to the mental realm as well. The more we have knowledge about this dynamics of the realm of the mental, the more mastery and control we gain over it. And human life, qualitatively speaking, and as far as the sufferings and the tormentations which every human being has to go through, it all depends to the extent we have gained the mastery over the realm of the mental. So again, I come to the main point to say that this exploration is one of the important explorations, is an understatement, because as human beings, you and me, all of us, it is the realm of the mental which actually decides everything, the way it functions and the direction in which it functions. Now, when we talk about the realm of the mental, we all know there are three aspects to it: cognition, volition, and emotion. Now, cognition itself is a very interesting, very important area in which a lot of studies and research has been done. And interestingly, it has given birth to a new science altogether known as cognitive sciences. And the outcome of this cognitive science has also contributed immensely to the area of education, giving rise to new theories of how human beings learn. How do we gain knowledge? So these are all connected areas. So when we talk about cognition, it's a very significant area which has today developed into a science of cognition or cognitive sciences. So before I get into, I know this is a very vast subject. To speak about this in a matter of 30 minutes is too audacious an attempt. But still, in my next 15-20 minutes, I shall keep my deliberation as brief as possible. I shall be just touching upon a few moot points. And I'm sure all the distinguished thinkers and speakers who have assembled here, they will be shedding further light on these points and areas, and it is going to be a very illuminating, and humanly speaking, enriching experience for all the audience present here. Now, one point. When we discuss this realm of the mental, of course, there are several point of views, the Oriental point of view, the Western point of view, and most of the speakers are going to speak in English. And I personally feel English language is very severely incapable when it comes to conveying certain ideas which are present in the so-called Vedic system of thought. So we will have to be very alert about the semantics of the whole deliberation so that we don't give rise to conceptions which would be blurred in its nature or confusing in its nature. So in my deliberation here for the next 15-20 minutes, I shall try to stick to those very Sanskrit terms as much as possible without trying to translate it into English, which has got its own different connotations based upon the background. So this is one thing which we have to keep in mind when we deliberate upon this subject. And my deliberation is essentially going to be from the Vedic standpoint, which would include also the Sankhya and Yoga systems of thought. Now, when we talk about exploring the realm of the mental, there are 4 important principles that we have to keep in mind. The first principle, number 1, this entire creation which we are experiencing here, it can be categorized into 2. I repeat once again, this entire creation which we are experiencing here, it can be categorized into 2. One is consciousness, and the other is matter. In the Vedic system of thought, it is a grand conclusion. As long as we are ignorant about the reality, this categorization stands valid. When the supreme knowledge dawns, then this categorization is lost. Then what remains is only consciousness. But before the dawn of the supreme knowledge, this categorization is essential for us to understand the dynamics of what we are experiencing. So this whole creation can be categorized into consciousness and matter. In Sanskrit, the better terms are Chaitanya and Jada. Still going further, in the Vedantic parlance, it can be referred to as Brahman and Maya. Still going further, from the Sankhyan standpoint point of view, we can say it is Purusha and Prakriti. Now, just one word of caution here. The Sankhyan Purusha is not the same as the Vedantic Brahman. I'm not going into the details of it. To put it in a very simple language, according to the Sankhya philosophers, Purusha or consciousness is multiple and many. Prakriti is one. But according to Vedanta, consciousness is indivisible whole. So just leaving aside this one small differentiation, the categorization between consciousness and matter is a valid categorization, whether it is from the standpoint of Sankhya or from the standpoint of Vedanta. It's a beautiful categorization. This entire creation is nothing but a play of consciousness and matter. Second principle, this great theme of exploration of the mental, when we talk about mind or the realm of the mind, let us make this point very clear. This mental realm is just as much material as a piece of wood is material. And just as a piece of wood can be given a shape, it can be transformed into a wood it can be transformed into a piece of furniture, a table or a chair. Similarly, the realm of the mental can be given a favorable shape. This is the greatest adventure that can be taken up only at the human plane of existence. No other species can do this. So, the second big principle is, this realm of the mental is as much material as a piece of stone is matter or a piece of wood is matter. Consciousness is different from it. Third principle. Everything in this creation, apart from consciousness, undergoes continuous change. Pratikshanam anyatha svabhava. Pratikshanam, every moment, anyatha svabhava. Its form, its content keeps on changing. Everything is getting modified. The realm of the mental is also constantly getting modified. The only thing which doesn't get modified and changed is consciousness. The fourth principle, which is the most relevant principle, I won't say the most relevant, all these points are actually very connected and important, but for our discussion about cognition and the other experiences of volition and emotion, there comes the importance of this fourth principle. This fourth principle is also a very well-established principle in the Vedic literature, but it has been put forth beautifully by a Sankhyan teacher whose name was Panchashikha. This great Sankhyan teacher, Panchashikha, says, in Sanskrit, the principle is laid down in these following words. It says, Ekameva darshanam, khyatireva darshanam. I repeat once again. Ekam eva darshanam, khyatireva darshanam. What does it mean? It means that darshanam, the Sanskrit word darshanam here means cognition. To have cognition, there is only one way. Panchashikha says, Sankhya says, the whole of the Vedic literature says this. What is that? How do we have cognition? It says, cognition is not possible without the involvement of a mental modification, which is known as khyati. The term ekameva darshanam, khyati reva darshanam. Khyati here means vritti. Vritti in Sanskrit, if you have to just translate it into English language, we have to say it is the modification of the mind into a certain form. Without this mind getting modified into a certain form, there cannot be any cognition. Neither the cognition of any object in this world, nor even the cognition of the Atman. For both these cognitions, we need the mental modification, which is known as antakarana vritti in Sanskrit. Now, going deeper into this issue, now I have used this word antakarana vritti. This is again a very profound verity which we are touching upon. And what does it mean? Now see, we as human beings, we have three bodies. Externally speaking, we just see the physical body, the physical structure. But every human being is made up of three bodies. One is the gross body which we see on the surface. The second body is the subtle body. And the third body is the causal body. In Sanskrit, the terms are sthula sharira, the gross body. The subtle body is referred to as sukshma sharira or linga sharira. And the causal body is referred to as karana sharira. Now, when we are talking about the mental realm, the realm of the mental, we are actually touching upon the subtle body. So the whole focus of our discussion is going to be the subtle body, not the gross body. Now, in the subtle body itself is made up of 17 components, I'm not going into the details of that. It will take a long time. Out of these 17 components, there is one component which will be the focus of our attention, which in the Vedas is referred to as Antakaranam. Again, I don't want to translate Antakaranam as mind. It's a totally wrong translation. Antakaranam is not equal to mind. So what does this Antakaranam mean? This needs to be understood properly. Opposed to this word called Antakaranam, we have another term called Bahishkaranam. Karanam means instrument. So Bahishkaranam means external instrument, and Antakaranam means internal instrument. Without these instruments, no one in this world or creation can cognize anything in this world. In all cognition, these karanas, these instruments are involved. So the outward instruments are the 5 sensory sense organs that we have. We all know that. But the sense organs by themselves, they cannot give us cognition unless the internal instrument is attached to it. So here comes the predominance of the internal instruments. It is this internal instrument which is referred to as Antakaranam. Anta means internal and Karanam means instrument. Again, what is the nature of this Antakaranam? Now we are coming to the realm of the mental. Our whole exploration will be into this one entity called Antakaranam. Here lies the whole mystery of this creation itself. It is such a fascinating investigation into what is reality about this wonderful thing called Antakaranam. So, what is this Antakaranam made up of? The Vedas tell us that the Antakaranam is one, but based upon 4 different kinds of functions which it performs, it has been given 4 different names based upon the functions which it is performing. For example, when we see a pot or a human being, what happens? This Antakaranam, it takes the form, Antakaranam, this entire Antakaranam, it takes the form of the pot. And when it takes the form of the pot, when the Antakaranam is not able to determine whether this is a pot or something else, this indeterminate state of the Antakaranam is what is referred to as Manas in Sanskrit, which is translated as mind. Again, I see, just look into the difficulties of semantics. When we use the word mind in a very loose manner, having different kinds of connotations based upon different backgrounds, it can create a kind of wrong conceptions in the minds of the listeners. That's why I'm trying to be as specific and categorical as much as possible. So what does Manas mean in the Vedic system of thought? That indeterminate state of the Antakaranam, where the Antakaranam is not able to decide whether this is a human being or whether it is a stump of a tree. This indeterminate state of the Antakaranam is what is referred to as Manas. In Sanskrit, it is described or defined as Sankalpa Vikalpatmika Antakarana Vritti. Now, when this very Antakaranam becomes sure about that this is a pot, this is not a table, when it becomes sure about this is a human being and it is not a stump of tree, this determinate state of the internal organ or Antakaranam is what is referred to as Buddhi. Again, very loosely translated as intellect in the English language, which does not fully convey what actually Buddhi refers to. So, Antakaranam, when it comes to a determinate conclusion about what it is perceiving, that determinate state of this internal organ is what is referred to as Buddhi. The same Antakaranam, when it remembers what it had seen in the past, that function, owing to that function, that very antakaranam is referred to as chitta, chittam. Anusandhatatmika antakarana vritti is chittam. Again, the same antakaranam or internal instrument, when it connects itself with the object which is cognized in a certain manner, say it begins to connect itself with the object saying that this pot belongs to me, or I want to acquire this pot, or I am going to take this pot home, something like that, in which the I sense is involved, then that very antakaranam becomes ahankara, this which is the center of volition. Now you see, it is one internal instrument which is referred to in the Vedic system of thought as antakaranam, which has been given 4 different names based upon 4 different types of functions it performs in our day-to-day life. So this is so much about the antakaranam, the internal instrument, which is made up of mana, buddhi, chitta and ahankara, loosely translated as mind, intellect, memory and the sense of I or ego, which is the center of volition. Now this is actually the realm of the mental which we are going to explore in the next 2 days. Now, going still further into this exploration of this antakaranam, how do we exactly cognize things in this world? It's the most fascinating subject which has been very elaborately taken upon by all the great seers of the Vedic system of thought. And it has been very detailed, threadbare, discussed by the great masters. So according to the Vedas, what happens when we cognize? First of all, see, we are coming to cognition. Cognition can be the cognition of an object in this world, or it can be the cognition of the Atman, the self. That is also a cognition. Both are cognitions, remember. So one is the cognition of the objective world which we are experiencing, and the other is the cognition of the consciousness which is behind the antakaranam itself. And as I said in the beginning, in both these cognitions, the involvement of antakarana vritti is indispensable. You cannot do away with the mental modification. The mental modification is essential, both for the objective kind of cognition, as far as the cognition of the Atman. Now, how do we cognize an object? So the great masters, they have, in Panchadashi, a beautiful verse comes which tells it is not the author of Panchadashi who is giving out some new idea. It is a well-established principle given in the Vedas itself. But Swami Vidyaranya, he puts it in a beautiful Sanskrit sloka, which gives in a very categorical manner how cognition takes place. So the author of Panchadashi says, Buddhi tatstha chidabhaso dvau api vyapnotu ghatam tatra ajnanam dhyanashet abhasena ghata spuret. What does it mean? To put it in a very simple language, it means that, see, when we perceive or cognize a pot, what is happening is, when we cognize a pot, it is a visual cognition. So we can have cognition, visual cognition, auditory cognition, olfactory cognition. These are all cognitions. When the antakarana vritti is associated with a particular sense organ, then we cognize that particular sense object. It may be a visual object, it may be sound, it can be a sense of touch, it can be smell, it can be any of one of the 5 sense organs. So the great masters, they say that when we see a pot, when we have a visual cognition, what is happening is this antakaranam, this inner instrument, getting associated with the organ of I, it assumes, it takes the form of the pot. Again I repeat, the antakaranam is modifying itself into the shape of the pot, and then the consciousness which is reflected in the antakarana, which is referred to as reflected consciousness. In Sanskrit, the word is chidabhasa. It is this chidabhasa which illumines this pot, and then we have the knowledge that this is pot. This is the dynamics of cognition as far as the Vedic system of thought is concerned. To put it in a very simple language, so what is cognition or what is knowledge? In knowledge, these two components are invariably involved. Whenever we have knowledge about something, you can see that these two components are invariably involved. One is antakarana vritti, and the second is the reflected consciousness, which illumines that object which is cognized. Without the interplay of these two things, consciousness and the mental modification, without the interplay of these two things, we cannot have knowledge, we cannot have cognition. So this is what is actually, which goes into the cognition of a particular object in this world. As I said, what about the cognition of the Atman? That is also very important, in fact the most important area of the human life. As I said, when it comes to the human plane of existence, the mental realm and the supramental realm, by supramental realm I mean the Atman. These are the areas which dominate the human life itself. What is human life unless we explore into these areas? It is absolutely a worthless life as long as we have not paid attention to this dimension of human personality. So what happens in the cognition of the Atman? This is another very important point. There is one very big important difference when it comes to the cognition of the Atman. In the cognition of the Atman also, there is an interplay between consciousness and the antakarana vritti, but with one major difference. In the cognition of an object, it is the chidabhasa or the reflected consciousness which illumines this pot, and we have the knowledge that this is a pot. But as far as the experience of Atman or Brahman is concerned, the mental modification is very much present there, the antakarana vritti is very much present there in a certain way, but the reflected consciousness has got no role to play as far as illumining Brahman or Atman is concerned. This is a great difference between the cognition of an object in our life and the cognition of the Atman. When it comes to the Atman, the reflected consciousness is unable to illumine the real Atman and Brahman itself. It is just like, to give a very simple example for us to understand, do we need a torchlight to illumine the sunlight? It is not needed. Reflected consciousness is like a torchlight, and the real consciousness, which is Atman or Brahman, is like a sunlight. So the reflected consciousness in the antakarana has got no role to play as far as illumining the real consciousness is concerned. So what happens there? It's a matter of experience which cannot be put in words. So, my dear friends, these are the simple, very important mood points which I wanted to keep before all of you. I know this is a very vast subject, and just to wind up my whole talk, I want to just keep certain points once again before you, very important points. As I said, the realm of the mind is as much material as a piece of wood is a matter. It is a realm which is continuously changing, and in every cognition, we should remember that the involvement of the mental modification or the antakarana vritti is indispensable. You cannot do away with it, whether you cognize a pot or whether you cognize the Atman. The involvement of a mental vritti is indispensable. And to just give a concluding remark, the great rishis of the Vedas, they have said, actually speaking, we are all just reflectors. Every human being, every mind, every antakarana, it is just a reflector, it is just a mirror in which the light of consciousness is reflecting. What are we seeing here? Men and women? No, these are all just reflectors in which the light of consciousness is getting reflected. And this mental realm can be better understood only from the vantage point of that pure consciousness, which is referred to as Atman. The mystery of the realm of the mental becomes demystified from the standpoint of the Atman. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maharaj. We would like to take this opportunity to release a long sought-after book titled New Perspectives in Indian Philosophy by Professor Kalidas Bhattacharyya that was in the works for some years. I now request Professor Nirmalya Narayan Chakraborty, who has painstakingly edited the book, to tell us something about it. I also request the professor to later introduce and invite the keynote speaker, Professor Jonardon Ganeri, who holds the Bimal Matilal Distinguished Professorship in Philosophy at the University of Toronto.
Our sincere regards to Srimad Shuddhidananda ji for his brilliant, lucid, insightful presentation of some of the important insights provided by classical Indian philosophers. Now, we are particularly elated to announce on this occasion the publication of a book entitled New Perspectives in Indian Philosophy by late Professor Kalidas Bhattacharyya. Professor Kalidas Bhattacharyya was one of the most distinguished philosophers of India in the latter half of 20th century. He was a creative thinker, a prolific writer, an able administrator, and above all, a wonderful human being. This book is a collection of 14 lectures that he delivered in Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture during 1965-1985. I am confident that every chapter in this book will provide intellectual nourishment to the prospective readers. Now may I request Professor Jonardon Ganeri to kindly formally release the book. And may I request Swami Suparnananda ji and Swami Shuddhidananda ji to join us in this book launch. It's indeed a privilege to have Professor Jonardon Ganeri as the keynote speaker today. Professor Ganeri is presently Bimal K. Matilal Distinguished Professor of Philosophy, University of Toronto in Canada. Professor Ganeri's research interests are in self, attention, consciousness, the epistemology of inquiry, the idea of philosophy as a practice and its relationship with literature, early modernity in South Asia, intellectual affinities between India, Greece, and China, Buddhist philosophy of mind, and also Fernando Pessoa's philosophy of self. Professor Ganeri is a fellow of the British Academy, and he is a recipient of 2015 Infosys Prize in the Humanities. He is the author of many highly acclaimed works. Let me mention just a few of them. Inwardness, An Outsider's Guide, Virtual Subjects, Fugitive Selves, Fernando Pessoa and his Philosophy, Classical Indian Philosophy, A History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps, Attention, Not Self, The Self, Naturalism, Consciousness in the First Person Stance, The Lost Age of Reason, Philosophy in Early Modern India, 1450 to 1700 CE, The Concealed Art of the Soul, Theories of Self and Practices of Truth in Indian Ethics and Epistemology, Philosophy in Classical India, The Proper Work of Reason, Artha, Testimony and the Theory of Meaning in Indian Philosophical Analysis, Semantic Powers, etc. He recently edited the Oxford Handbook of Indian Philosophy. May I now request Professor Jonardon Ganeri to deliver his keynote speech, please.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much to Swami Tadvratananda, Swami Suparnananda, and Professor Nirmalya Chakraborty for inviting me to come here today. Imagine, if you will, coming back as a fly. What are you really imagining? Perhaps what you see is being in a fly's body, with a fly's ability, well, to fly. A fly's greater range of points of view on its, that is, your surroundings. You take up less space, and there is this irritatingly uncertain buzzing noise following you around. But essentially it's you, incarnated in the body of a fly. Or perhaps what you imagine is actually becoming a fly, with a fly's appetites for gone-off food, a fly's more limited cognitive skill set, restricted emotional and intellectual life, but extraordinary powers of locomotion and unusual forms of sense perception. When you imagine in this way, your entire outlook, your way of being in the world, your emotional, cognitive and sensory landscape is different. Let me say, for short, your bearing. In either case, you are, as philosophers say, imagining what it's like from the inside to be a fly. Your imagined experience is from the perspective of a fly, rather than one in which you look upon your fly self from, as it were, an external vantage point. It's immersive. Yet imagining from the inside is by itself comparatively undemanding. You imagine flying from the inside, for example, if you imagine the air flowing past and the ceiling coming towards you. And you can imagine doing that while in your own body. Imagining yourself immersively and differently embodied is already a more involved feat of imagination. And imagining yourself immersively, differently embodied and having a different cognitive bearing is more challenging still. The distinction between immersively imagining being differently embodied and immersively imagining having a new bearing crops up often in Indian stories about reincarnation. An avatara, the word is by now a familiar one in the English language, is a god descended down to earth, But are we talking about the same old God in a new human body? Or is it that the God has become human, which for a God is presumably quite a lot like a human being becoming a fly? In the millennium-old Mokshopaya, a great Kashmiri philosophical storybook better known as Yoga Vasishta, a doe falls asleep and sees herself as a bee. Is the story inviting us to imagine the doe as herself in apian form, or are we meant to suppose that the doe now sees herself as a bee inside and out? In another Indian story from a different source, the sage Narada is made by Vishnu to see himself as a woman called Saubhagya Sundari, forgetting all about his former male life. And the same question arises. Is it Narada himself in a woman's body, or does Narada now think of himself to be Saubhagya Sundari? It's relevant here that the same word, avatara, is also used to refer to an actor's entrance from the wings, stepping not just onto the stage, but also into a part. I believe that more often than not, such stories are not just about body swapping, but about having a new bearing, something more than mere incarnation or reincarnation is going on. The 20th century Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa's curiosity about the reach of the imagination and the shifting sands of identity began early in life and remained the one constant preoccupation in this creatively most fluid of writers. Pessoa had no trouble imagining himself to be a fly. He wrote, "Who knows for what supreme forces, gods or demons of truth in whose shadow we roam, I may be nothing but a shiny fly that alights in front of them for a moment or two. A facile hypothesis? Maybe. But I didn't think, I felt. It was carnally, directly, with a profound and dark horror, that I made this ludicrous comparison. I was a fly when I compared myself to one. I really felt like a fly when I imagined I felt like one. And I felt I had a flyish soul, slept flyishly, and was flyishly withdrawn. And what's more horrifying is that I felt at the same time like myself. I automatically raised my eyes towards the ceiling, lest a lofty wooden ruler would swoop down and swat me, as I might swat that fly." Mostly, though, Pessoa wanted to imagine himself to be a different person, to have another self, while continuing necessarily to be himself. Over time, he imagined himself to be over 100 different people, even if only 3 of his other selves were fully rounded out alternative selves, the 3 great poets of the Portuguese language, Alberto Cairo, Álvaro de Campos, and Ricardo Reich. For above all, Pessoa wanted to multiply himself, to be, as he said, plural like the universe, as he once jotted down in a memo to self on a scrap of paper. Imagining being a virtual other is a way to achieve plurality, a feat he repeated 100 times over and thrice in extreme detail. The goal, as he has Campos say in Time's Passage, one of his most celebrated poems, is to feel everything in every way. The poem goes, to feel everything in every way, to live everything from all sides, to be the same thing in all ways possible at the same time, to realize in oneself all humanity at all moments in one scattered, extravagant, complete, and aloof moment. Pessoa vows to be plural like the universe and seeks to achieve this in not one but 2 ways. The first is through the mechanism of self-estrangement. The the subject of experience becomes, inside the virtual reality of a poem, another. The name Pessoa gives this mechanism is heteronymy, which is not merely having another name, but rather having the name of another. Heteronyms are imagined minds, simulated selves, subjective artifacts, made up, individuated points of view, and no less real for that. And as if imagining being someone else, invariably a fabricated other, not an actual other person, for I am the prop in these games of make-believe about myself. As if that weren't hard enough, Pessoa went even further and claimed that there is a higher level of what he describes as dreaming for metaphysical minds. He believed that he could, in very rare moments, or at least as a conceptual possibility, imagine being not one but many different people at the same time. The highest stage of dreaming, he says, is when, having created a picture with various figures, whose lives we live all at the same time, we are jointly and interactively all those souls. This leads to an incredible degree of depersonalization and the reduction of our spirit to ashes. This second attempt to achieve plurality within himself is through a mechanism of duplication. And the idea is a running theme in Pessoa's work right from the very beginning. It's already there in his first published story from 1913, entitled The Forest of Estrangement. The protagonist bifurcates into a man and a woman, and he says, the forest, the two walkers, and I unsure which one I was, or if I was both, or neither. These two techniques of self-pluralization, which we might call pluralization by self-estrangement and pluralization by living a life in parallel. And according to poet Pessoa, to be plural is the aim of every great poet. In his most philosophical moments, Pessoa does wonder what makes a person real. If having an individuated point of view is enough, then surely the virtual selves he imagines himself to become are as real as the actual self he is. Or would one say, rather, that this so-called actual self is just one more self among the rest? The philosopher David Chalmers has argued that the virtual objects we see when we put on a headset or immerse ourselves in a virtual world are real. Granted, they're digital objects made out of information generated by computers, but they are, for all that, as real as objects made out of protons and electrons. Chalmers calls this reality plus in his new book. Pessoa is interested in a version of that question, which he examines most fully in one of his most philosophical writings, Notes for the Memory of My Master Cairo. But he takes matters a step further, entertaining the intriguing idea that there are virtual subjects as well as virtual objects. That in immersing oneself in a virtual reality generated by one's imagination, one might also virtualize oneself. So one might call Pessoa's philosophy reality double plus. The avatars of computer simulations are just bodies, manipulated, controlled, and even inhabited, but by users who are the same within the simulation as without. Pessoa's imagined others are avatars in the truest sense, bearers, not just bodies, ways of being in the world. He says, the author of these books cannot affirm that all these different and well-defined personalities who have incorporeally passed through his soul don't exist, for he does not know what it means to exist, nor whether Hamlet or Shakespeare is more real or truly real. Reality double plus, in all its inherent plurality, is Pessoa's metaphysics of the virtual, his philosophy of self-estrangement, his purpose as a poet, and his reason to be alive. Pessoa's poetry is a poetry of immersion. Poems for Pessoa simulate virtual realities, realities in which I, the subject, am an immersed participant. Pessoa, a restless voyager in these alternative landscapes of sensation, precociously adept at envisaging realities, discovers there a way to make himself someone other than he is. In the virtual reality generated by a poem, it is I who is immersed, at the centre, the one with reference to whom things are presented and events take place. It is I, and yet it is another I, a me who is not the me of the ordinary world outside the poem. I, but yet another I. Simply put, this is because a poem's purpose is not merely or even to describe what's there, but to prescribe a way of being, a new modality of having a world in view. It's I because within the virtual reality generated by the poem, the first-person perspective is mine. It's another I because the mode of being in the world, for this I in this poem, is entirely new. That's why it's easier to other oneself in poetry, because the transformation is not in what one sees, but how one sees it. In poems, we are not our ordinary selves. We are virtual subjects immersed in the world freshly seen. We might call these two dimensions of virtual subjectivity immersive centrality and immersive forminess, respectively. Immersive centrality is the idea that one inhabits a field perspective within the simulation. We can also refer to this as the positional conception of self. Immersive forminess is the idea that how one experiences matters as much as what one experiences, and indeed is essential to being who one is. I'm going to explain this idea in terms of a notion of a mode of poetic attention. Attention in general structures experience into topic and background, and as Lucy Alford has recently argued, poetry does this in particular ways. We shall also have to ponder the tricky question: what happens when attention turns inwards, when the topic of my attention is myself? In undertaking to be plural like the universe, Fernando Pessoa was not the first to associate the creed of the poet with the demand to be many. We can better appreciate what makes Pessoa unique by way of a brief review of his pre-modern precursors. Already in a letter dated October 27, 1818, the Romantic poet John Keats had famously described the poet as a chameleon. He said, "As to the poetical character itself, I mean that sort of which, if I am anything, I am a member. It is not itself, it has no self. It is everything and nothing. What shocks the virtuous philosopher delights the chameleon poet. The poet is the most unpoetical of anything in existence because he has no identity. He is continually in, for, and filling some other body, the sun, the moon, the sea, and men and women who are creatures of impulse, are poetical and have about them an unchangeable attribute. The poet has none." So what Keats is saying here is that a poet has no identity to call their own, meaning specifically no unchangeable attribute. The poet is ever infilling a body, and like a chameleon, ever changing to fit in. What Keats' chameleon conception of the poet's oath to be plural amounts to is a certain claim about the relationship between mind and world, that for a poet the direction of fit must be from world to mind, that the mind of a poet fills whatever space it finds itself in. The chameleon conception has it that a poet has as many minds as there are embodied contexts, because to think as a poet is to endlessly adapt oneself to circumstance. The world, Keats will say in a subsequent letter of April 21st, 1819, is a veil of soul-making. It's the world that gives identity to mind. He wrote, "Call the world, if you please, the veil of soul-making. Then you will find out the use of the world. I say soul-making. Soul is distinguished from an intelligence. There may be intelligences or sparks of the divinity in millions, but they are not souls until they acquire identities, till each has is personally itself. How then are souls to be made? Contained a universe of thought and feeling within itself, and had no one particular bias or exclusive excellence more than any other. He was just like any other man, but that he was like all other men. He was the least of an egoist that it's possible to be. He was nothing in himself, but he was all that others were, or that they could become. He not only had in himself the germs of every faculty and feeling, but he could follow them by anticipation intuitively into all their conceivable ramifications, through every change of fortune or conflict of passion or turn of thought. Shakespeare, Hazlitt says, had only to think of anything in order to become that thing, with all the circumstances belonging to it. When he conceived of a character, whether real or imaginary, he not only entered into all its thoughts and feelings, but seemed instantly, and as if by touching a secret spring, to be surrounded with all the same objects, subject to the same skyey influences, the same local, outward, and unforeseen accidents which would occur in reality. Hazlitt's Shakespeare has only to exercise his formidable powers of imagination, anticipation, and intuition in order to become that thing, and in so doing to think what it thinks, feel what it feels, and in general to experience the world as it does from its perspective and, in my terminology, its bearing. The guiding metaphor is that of the theatre, of an actor's ability to become the character whose part they play. The direction of fit is not now from world to mind, but from actor to role. Shakespeare, as playwright and as actor, becomes the very character. Here again we find the poet described as everything and nothing. And here too the nothing is immediately qualified. It's a nothing in himself, a lack of fixed identity, not an empty nothingness. Shakespeare is nobody in himself and everybody in potentia. This is not the extinction of personality, but its multiplication. And it is an immersive bearing, a way of being in the world, not merely a way of occupying a place. The conception of the poet's oath embodied in the cult of Shakespeare as the universal poet finds an exceptional formulation in a short story by Jorge Luis Borges, which is entitled Everything and Nothing. Borges writes, instinctively he had already trained himself to the habit of feigning that he was somebody, so that his nobodiness would not be discovered. In London, he found the calling he'd been predestined to. He became an actor. That person who stands upon a stage and plays at being another person. No one was as many men as that man whose repertoire, like that of the Egyptian Proteus, was all the appearances of being. Despite Borges' description of the actor's performance as a feign, the point is that Shakespeare as actor does become each of the characters he plays. There are, of course, times when an actor is not on stage, and these moments are, as it were, blanks or gaps in the actor's personal history. Borges describes them as a return to being a nobody, echoing George Bernard Shaw's conception of Shakespeare as somebody devoid of a soul. But perhaps it's better to say that the life of a poet contains discontinuities and is not a seamless, continuous stream. During these interruptions, yes, the poet is not a somebody, but we should not fall into the error of reifying the in-between states under the label poet as nobody. That's a version of the same mistake which leads to the comparison between Keats and Zen. It would be preferable to say that there are times when there is no poet. Well, against the background of these two pre-modern understandings of the poet's creed, Pessoa comes out with a radically new and modern one. Be plural like the universe is his motto, and he enacts it by becoming a plurality of poets, the famous triplet in Portuguese literature, and a vast plurality of other individuated points of view too. What now is the direction of fit? Pessoa says that he loves to, I quote, to admire the beauty of things, to trace the imperceptible through the minute, the poetic soul of the universe. And he continues with a fascinating explanation of what poetry is. He says, "For poetry is astonishment, admiration, as of a being fallen from the skies, taking full consciousness of his fall, astonished about things, as of one who knew things in their souls, striving to remember this knowledge, remembering that it was not thus he knew them, not under these forms and these conditions, but remembering nothing more." So poetry is astonishment of the sort one feels on encountering something for the first time, a childlike wonder at what there is, and finding in everything thus encountered a deeper meaning that seems to stem from an undeterminate sense of familiarity. And poetry is admiration, a respect for the beauty of all that the world contains. Astonishment and admiration are, first of all, both world-involving states of mind. We're astonished by or at something. We feel admiration for something. They are both, moreover, affective states, emotions. One feels astonished and feels admiration. They are reactions to the world and not projections onto it, which is to say they are not primarily acts of creative imagination. And yet they are not passive reactions, as changing one's colour to fit one's environment might be considered to be. For although Pessoa's poet falls upon the world as if encountering it for the first time, he does so taking full consciousness of his fall. That is to say, poetic admiration and poetic astonishment are fully self-conscious emotions, emotional states of the sort that one can be in only if one is aware of oneself being in them. So poetry is a singling out of something in one's environment, the attention to it and the simultaneous attention to oneself in the act of attending to it. For Pessoa adds, quote, "My inner sense predominates in a way over my five senses, that I see things in this life, I do believe it, in a way different from other men. There was a wealth of meaning in a thing so ridiculous as a door key, a nail in a wall, a cat's whiskers. There is," writes Pessoa, "poetry in everything, in land and in sea, in lake and in riverside. It's in the city too, deny it not. It's evident to me as I sit here, there's poetry in this table, in this paper, in this inkstand. There's poetry in the rattling of the cars on the streets, in the minute, common, ridiculous motion of a workman who, the other side of the street, is painting the signboard of a butcher's shop. Anything, however mundane or seemingly insignificant, can serve as the theme of poetic astonishment and admiration. Poetic astonishment and poetic admiration are names for those states of mind whereby one not only sees things in the world as if for the first time, but also sees in those things other meanings, meanings which perhaps go unseen by those less self-aware. All this is already a far cry from the negative capabilities of Keats and the prodigious feats of imagination Hazlitt attributes to Shakespeare. The direction of fit, I suggest, is now one from attention to subjectivity. Pessoa does not simply say, be plural. He says, be plural like the universe. The universe is itself plural, and it's the plurality of the universe to which, in some way, the poet's oath to be plural is answerable. Yet the veil of soul-making is not now the world as such, the world in itself, but rather the world as an object of self-conscious attention. A paragraph in Pessoa's book, called The Book of Disquiet, describes the nature of the movement from attention to subjectivity even more vividly. The narrator says, "The only way you can have new sensations is by forging a new soul. It's useless to try to feel new things without feeling them in a new way. And you can't feel in a new way without changing your soul. For things are what we feel they are. How long have you known this without yet knowing it? And the only way for there to be new things, for us to feel new things, is there to be some novelty in how we feel them. That is to say, a self is a way of feeling, a style of experiencing the world. And if we combine this insight with the idea that poetry consists in astonishment and admiration, and remember that Pessoa pluralizes himself by becoming a plurality of poets, we arrive at the conclusion that there is a plurality of modes of astonishment and admiration, a plurality of ways of self-consciously attending to things, and that each such way of taking the world in view is also a way of having a different self or soul. The poet becomes plural in sustaining a plurality of ways of attending to the world, each one a mode of actively seeing meaning in even the most mundane of things. The plurality of the subject is now, therefore, essentially a plurality of aesthetic encounters, because attending to how one attends is the mode of seeing appropriate to aesthetic experience. One sees a horse and is aware of how one sees it. As Bence Nane has recently put it, when we're looking at an apple, we can attend to the features of the apple, or we can attend to the features of our experience of the apple, or we can attend to both and the relation between the two. Attending this third way is what i.e. Nane, take to be a crucial and perhaps even a universal feature of aesthetic experience. Indeed, Nane refers to Pessoa as an authority for this analysis of aesthetic experience. It's said that the years 1875 to 1927 were peak years for the modernist crisis in the hypothesis of an undivided and unitary self, a period into which Pessoa's own life almost squarely fits. Yet Pessoa's philosophy of the plurality of the subject is quite different from that of other modernists of his period. In thinkers from Diderot to Proust and Nietzsche to Yeats, what we find is a conception of mind as a hive of competing instincts and drives. Man is a plurality of forces, says Nietzsche. This is not a plurality of subjects, but a single subject, one, however, which is now composite and fragmented. Diderot, Bernard Williams writes, was always attracted to a picture of the self as something constantly shifting and reacting and altering, as a swarm of bees, as a clavichord or harp or other instrument, with the wind or some other force playing on it. It's near to the picture that Nietzsche offers of our desires and needs groping around and reaching out inside us as though they formed some kind of polyp. Nietzsche comes closer to Pessoa in his posthumously published fragments of 1885, writing that, quote, "The hypothesis of a single subject is perhaps not necessary. Perhaps it's also permissible to assume a plurality of subjects whose reciprocal play and struggle underlie our thinking and even our conscience." In a similar vein, Marcel Proust reflects on those innumerable and humble selves that compose our personality, and he refers to a truly objective truth, namely that none of us is single, that each of us contain many persons who do not all have the same moral value. Pessoa's key departure from such sentiments consists in his insistence that there must always be what we might call a frame of heteronomy, a context of simulation, expressed in such formula as "in my dream," "in my poem," or "in my imagination." When Pessoa writes poetry as the heteronym Alberto Cairo, it is not the case that sitting in his study, he has literally transformed himself into this other poet. No, it's that in his dreaming and in his writing, he has become Alberto Cairo, imagining himself seeing the world in the manner Cairo sees it. The idea that there's a frame of heteronomy is crucial in understanding Pessoa's project. And it's why Pessoan plurality has nothing to do with multiple personality disorders or the fragmentation of the self. In Notes for the Memory of My Master Cairo, Camposh is given to ask if there's anything more genuinely Fernando Pessoa than the mental state, poetic intersections in which the narrator's state of mind is simultaneously in two states, in which the subjective and objective join together while remaining separate, and in which the real and the unreal merge in order to remain distinct. In these poems, Fernando Pessoa has made a veritable portrait of his soul. In that one unique moment, he succeeded in having his own individuality, such as he never had before and can never have again, because he has no individuality. End of quote. The poet performs a sophisticated feat of dual attention, dividing his awareness, or his or her awareness, between something in the world and his or her own subjective state in the act of attending. The poet attends both to the what of experience and the how of experience. How a thing shows up is just as important as which thing comes into view. For it is in this that its deeper meanings are to be found. My attention floats between two worlds, Pessoa declares already in the Forest of Estrangement. In her important recent study of the forms of poetic attention, Lucy Alford likewise speaks of poetry's double transitivity, where she says, the element of the imagination in poetry's transitive intention acknowledges the subject's active part in penetrating beyond direct perception, pushing into and opening the mystery objects hold in their modes of perceptual evasion. And she proposes to pass the phrase attending poetically to mean something like bringing formal attention to the ways in which attention is manipulated by the form of language itself, where the doubleness of attention to the form of attention is intentional and uniquely poetic in nature. Indeed, Alford finds in Whitman the very idea I have identified in Pessoa, that the poet's creed to be plural is discharged through a multiplicity in the modes of self-conscious attention. Alford says that despite the plurality of Whitman's attention, there is a sense not of fragmentation, but rather of manyness, so that the subject is constituted in the particularity of a given mode of attention. Alford's categorization of the forms of attention under four broad headings, contemplation, desire, recollection, and imagination, constitute a clean analysis of what are, for Pessoa, the veils of soul-making. Missing from Alford's description, however, is any reference to astonishment or admiration, and these states would fall under a fifth heading, emotion. That certain emotions are themselves forms of poetic attention, and indeed that they are the highest of all such forms, is one of Pessoa's key innovations and insights. Astonishment means something like surprise in recognition. Something I see which I expect to be a certain way presents itself as otherwise. I'm astonished. Expectation is linked to background knowledge and so to memory, as indeed Pessoa intimates. The surprise due to an incongruity between my expectation and what I perceive as the case. I come across something in the world and it astonishes me. I had expected it, possibly at some subliminal level, to be quite otherwise. So the emotion of astonishment requires an expectation, a perception, and an awareness of their incongruence. Admiration is more a term of appraisal, itself a key component in emotion according to most theories of the emotions. To feel admiration for something is to evaluate it as excelling in some way. One admires the beauty in a sunset, one admires the courage in a deed. What we're led to say then, and this is my conclusion, is that attending poetically is seeing in a thing something one did not expect and yet appraises positively. To be conscious of one's surprise and admiration is to acknowledge there's something new in the thing one sees, and so to discover in it a deeper meaning. In enjoining the poet to be plural, what the poet's creed demands is that the poet cultivate the ability to be surprised by the world in as many ways as possible, and to discover ever new ways to find something of beauty or value in this surprise. All in all, a far richer and more fascinating depiction of the cognitive life of the poet than simply as someone engaged in superhuman feats of prodigious imagination. Pessoa has Bernardo Suarez speak of the world's astonishing objectivity. And he himself says that everything has an astonishing immediate reality, and he feels fellowship with each thing when he sees it, and friendship when he touches it. The astonishing reality of things, writes the poet Cairo, is my discovery every day. Astonishment is an emotion directed towards the immediate world, while fellowship and friendship are nothing if not avowals of admiration. Thank you very much.
I thank Professor Jonardon Ganeri from the bottom of my heart for readily and graciously agreeing to deliver the keynote address, which was filled with remarkable insights coming from his background of cosmopolitan and intercultural exchange of knowledge, analysis, and emotion, especially in the field of philosophy and literature, through Fernando Pessoa's works. I also believe the professor has a soft corner for us, otherwise he would not have come all the way from Toronto to participate in the seminar. I thank the professor once again. I am also immensely grateful to revered Swami Shuddhidananda Maharaj for addressing us all in spite of his recent ill health and exposing us to some of the salient points from Indian philosophy relevant to the theme of the seminar. I am indebted to revered Swami Suparnananda Maharaj for his encouragement, support, guidance, and giving us a long rope in organizing the seminar. I am grateful to the participating speakers from Kolkata, outstation and abroad, who have been kind enough to accommodate this seminar in their already busy schedules. I hope you'll all enjoy your stay and enjoy participating in the seminar proceedings. Likewise, I am beholden to revered Swami Adipurushananda Maharaj, Swami Shivadananda Maharaj, and Swami Surottamananda Maharaj for supporting me in the arrangement of the seminar, be it the necessary arrangement of funds or hospitality or transportation or maintenance. I also would like to thank the staff of the departments concerned for their involvement, especially the staff of the Center of Indological Studies and Research. I offer my pranams and namaskars to monks who are present here, and thank the audience for the patience and participation. And finally, I owe much to Professor Nirmalya Narayan Chakraborty, who has been at the forefront of organizing this seminar, without whom this seminar would not have seen the participation of such erudite and accomplished scholars. My deepest gratitude goes to him. Before we bring this session to a close, there are two announcements. The newly released book, New Perspectives in Indian Philosophy by Professor Kalidas Bhattacharyya is available at the bookstall below, and the academic sessions will start at 9:30 a.m. sharp tomorrow. Priyatam Pundarikakshaha Sarvayagneshwaro Harihi Tasmin Stushte Jagattushtam Prinite Prinitam Jagate Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.